They also said that the only reason her injuries were so severe was because of her old skin. Basically, if she had been younger, they claimed her injuries would not have been so bad. Like, F old people, right? And their old skin.
Yeah,
like,
if you were young and hot, you would have been fine.
Yeah, what a bunch of bumholes. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things, a weekly variety podcast that gives you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering.
We explore stories from the darker corners of true crime, the hidden gems of history, and the jaw-dropping deeds of extraordinary people.
I'm Kyle Risi, your ringmaster for this week's episode.
I'm Adam Cox, your doggy daycare manager for this week.
Because people have dogs.
That's right, and they need them to be looked after whilst they're performing in the circus.
Oh, so it's just for the circus performers?
Yeah.
What about a daycare nurse? Like for people who have kids?
No.
Like little circus freak kids?
They have to fend for themselves.
Okay, just the dogs.
Just the dogs.
More important.
Yeah.
I love it. Before we dive in, a quick heads up to all of our lovely freaks out there. Remember that signing up to our Patreon as a free member will get you early access to next week's episode an entire 7 days before anyone else. And as always, it's completely free of charge to access.
But if you want even more, then consider becoming a certified freak for a small monthly subscription. That'll unlock all of our unreleased episodes up to 6 weeks earlier, brand new, never heard before, and straight off the press.
And we're, of course, also expanding our Patreon benefits even further. You can now access all of our vintage Compendium episodes from Season 1. And like we say every week, these are the episodes back in the day when we were first getting started. So they're not great with the audio, but there are some incredible stories in there.
And there is so much content for you to get stuck into. We'll be adding even more exclusive episodes for Patreon members as the weeks go by. Signing up for as little as $3 is literally the best way to support the show.
And depending on, of course, the tier that you choose, we have some exclusive merch to send your way, absolutely free. Beautifully machine-lathed exclusive Compendium keychains, which we'll be offering to our certified freak members completely free of charge. So if you are a certified freak member, make sure to send us your address via DM and we'll be sending you out one in the post, no matter where in the world you are.
So we can always be
near your crotch.
Near your crotch. And while you're at it, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. Your support helps us reach even more people who, like you, love a good tale of the unexpected.
All right then, freaks, enough of the housekeeping. Because Adam, today on the Compendium, we are diving into an assembly of lawsuits, lies, and latte-level negligence.
Latte-level negligence? Mm-hmm. Someone didn't pour in milk or pour in off milk? Is that negligence for a latte?
Let's start with a headline,
okay.
Especially for you, because for some of our non-American listeners, a lot of them will not be familiar with this story. But I want to know your first reaction when you hear news articles like this one. Mm-hmm. So I want you to read out this news headline in kind of like a punchy newsboy kind of way. Imagine you are selling your very last paper of the day. And as soon as you sell this one, you can get to go home and you get to play on the PlayStation.
Okay. Extra, read all about it. Woman burned by hot McDonald's coffee gets $2.9 million? What?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money for just burning your mouth on some hot liquid.
So this was actually released back in August of 1994 by the Associated Press, who ran with the story. And the opening kind of segment of the actual article goes, a woman who was scolded when her McDonald's coffee spilled was awarded nearly $2.9 million, or about 2 days worth of coffee sales at the fast food chain. Lawyers for Stella Liebeck argued that McDonald's coffee was far too hot. The state district court jury awarded $2.9 million in punitive damages on top of $160,000 in compensatory damages. Testimony that Wednesday revealed that McDonald's served its coffee at temperatures between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 82 to 87 degrees Celsius for our UK listeners. He goes on to say, based on advice from coffee consultants who claimed it tastes better at that temperature. So Adam, have you heard of that headline before? Have you heard of this story before?
I'm trying to think. Maybe. or things very similar to it if it's not this one?
So hearing this headline, just at face value, what do you think the intent of stories like this are?
I reckon it's to invoke rage amongst people, because how dare she? I got burnt the other day. I didn't get money.
And of course, this did cause outrage all over America. When you think about American culture, especially when you see it from the outside as Europeans, there are some kind of typical cultural stereotypes that spring to mind, obviously within the context of what we've just talked about. What do you think some of those stereotypes might be?
In the US, it's kind of that where there's blame, there's a claim. Like people, I don't know, would slip over and then break their neck and then they'd get like a paycheck of like $20,000 or something.
Yeah, that is it. And I know we have it in the UK as well, but in America especially, they have developed this kind of culture or this reputation as being a bit kind of sue happy. Do you know what I mean? You hear about it all the time, especially in like TV and film.
Oh, yeah.
And we've all heard those kind of stories before, like a mother trips over her own child in a supermarket, and then suddenly there is this massive lawsuit against the shop. It becomes this big deal where like the mother's life has never been the same again and she can't work. And so they go off and they sue the supermarket.
Yeah, because she can't bend over into the frozen veg aisle anymore.
But all these stories typically have the same thing in common, and they always zoom in on the irony or the ridiculousness or the audacity of the situation. For example, it was her kid as she fell over. So why should the supermarket be responsible for paying her out when she was the one who fell over her own kid?
How do they get away with this, though? It just seems so crazy to think that, I guess maybe just being from the UK, to ever think that you could get away with suing the supermarket or whatever when you know that it was your kid's fault. It's like, how does that, I don't know, it doesn't compute with me to do
And
that.
the thing is, though, that's the point of these stories, is that they do highlight the ridiculousness of these situations whereby people do go, well, how can she possibly get away with that? And because it's a lawsuit and because she was awarded that amount of money or whatever it might be, that just creates even more outrage because like she's managed to argue that the supermarket is culpable for her falling over a kid, for example.
Yeah, and I guess that just encourages other people to then sue for other ridiculous things.
Exactly. But here's the thing, what most people don't know is that this reputation of being trigger happy with suing people, especially businesses in the USA, is rooted in how the American legal system is physically set up. It's by design to make it easier for regular citizens to take legal action against companies that might have harmed people in some sort of way. And its history goes all the way back to the 1940s when the US government started introducing a ton of policies to make it easier for citizens to do exactly that thing. Whereas in countries like the UK, they take a very different approach. And we'll come back to that in a little bit more detail later on. But while these stereotypes, they do actually reflect real cultural differences, this one, the idea that Americans are outrageously litigious, is actually a massive myth.
So where does that come from then?
Believe it or not, this was actually crafted by big American corporations through a very carefully orchestrated campaign designed to stigmatize anyone who dared to take a company to court. And these campaigns, Adam, they worked flawlessly. They were so effective because these campaigns would painstakingly comb through and cherry-pick extreme-sounding lawsuits like the one I just described with a woman falling over a child. They would strip them of all their context. They would leave out the humanity at the center of them and then lean heavily into the mockery aspects. But also, it wasn't unusual for these campaigns or these companies to just make shit up altogether.
And this was to try and discourage people from doing a lawsuit or suing anyone because they read all these ridiculous stories?
Exactly that. And as a result, these people, they start to believe that these frivolous lawsuits were a serious national problem in America. On top of that, they were resulting in this belief that organizations were offering out less jobs, they were lowering wages, and they were making prices across the USA increase as these corporations try to saddle the cost of all these big expensive lawsuits that were being flung at them. All of which, by the way, was just fear-mongering. They were pushed by the same organizations trying to avoid accountability in the first place.
Right, okay.
And once this idea starts to seep into the culture, it starts showing up in American movies and sitcoms until eventually the rest of the world bought into this belief that Americans were very litigious and that would sue you just for looking at them funny. And the kicker is that this just simply was not true, because when you actually dig into the data, it turns out that Americans are less likely to sue for punitive damages than citizens in many other developed countries. It's just that other countries like the UK have a different way of doing it.
Really?
Eventually, this lawsuit epidemic, if you want to call it that, this narrative got so loud that politicians in America stopped paying attention to this. And then with pressure from corporate lobbyists, new laws start getting drafted, many of which make it all the way to the American president's desk. And it's all designed to make it harder for regular citizens to sue big businesses. Essentially, corporations wanted to operate without risk of being held to account, even when their products were literally killing people.
No way. I always thought maybe it was just like one of the, not 10 commandments, but in America, you know, you can have a gun, you can have a white picket fence.
Yeah, and you have the right to sue.
Yes.
The thing is that they do have the right to sue, and it's by design that they should have that right. And I'll explain a bit about the history in just a moment. So it was just a massive scandal. The fact that more people around the world don't know about this is actually really shocking to me. This idea that American corporations are lobbying governments to screw over the working class is just not a new concept. And one of the most famous examples of frivolous lawsuits that was used to win public support for pushing changes to the law was the very famous case of Stella Liebeck, that woman who spilled her McDonald's coffee in her lap while driving and then sued for $2.9 million because that coffee was far too hot.
So I thought it's stories because of like that is why you have like that like extreme warning on all these foods, like hot, super hot.
That's actually a myth in itself, because when Stella Liebeck went to McDonald's on that day and was handed her hot coffee, it did actually say that the contents of the coffee was really hot. The only difference is that back then in the early 90s, when you bought a coffee from any coffee shop, it's served in a white styrofoam cup. So the warning on it is just embossed over it. So you don't even see it anyway.
Yeah.
But it was there. So that is a little bit of a myth. But it is also true to say that since then, those warnings were a lot more pronounced on the cups. And also they make like different provisions for you to kind of have the little sippy cup hole on the top, because before you had to take the lid off in order to drink your coffee. Now you even have takeaway cups that you don't even need to remove the lid to put your sugar and your milk into them.
There are two types of people though.
Go on.
There's people that like hot coffee and there's people that like drinkable coffee straight away.
Yeah, you like drinkable coffee straight away.
Yeah, because if it's too hot, I feel like there's a burntness to it and it's just not right. Like when we got our coffee maker, there's a thermometer and it says what temperature it should be for different drinks.
Is it?
Yeah.
Interesting. We're going to get into some of the details around how hot coffee should be sold a bit later on, because it's fascinating.
You can quiz me.
But I love my coffee stone cold, but I love it to be brewed and served boiling hot. Because I love the anticipation of knowing I'm going to be able to drink my coffee in a bit, but I always let it cool down, almost to the point where it's stone cold.
That's stupid.
I know, that's why I always freak out at you for like, stop setting the kettle to boil at 85 degrees. I'm like, boil it at 100, but then you're like, Kyle, you don't drink your coffee until it's 5 degrees.
Exactly. And also, if you're a mum, I understand why hot coffee is important, because you don't get to drink your coffee for like ages. So that makes sense to have it extra hot then.
This is going to be such a great episode, because I'm going to tell you some really crazy things that McDonald's think about when it comes to the temperature of the coffee.
They do think of mums.
They think about money, Adam. And the story of Stella Liebeck, it became one of the most widely shared and mocked legal stories in America. But the thing is, Stella's story is not what people think, because crucial information is deliberately left out of the story. And a lot of folks, even today, don't even know what the facts are. So today, Adam, I want to tell you the real story behind Stella Liebeck and the infamous McDonald's hot coffee case.
Okay. She didn't lose like an arm or anything, did she?
Put it this way. Her vagina will never be the same again.
Oh, my word.
Maybe we should redact that. But it's true. We're not going to go into the details of it, but basically that's the truth.
Well, then I get why she perhaps was awarded that money. Bloody hell.
Let's not focus on that, because let's remember the humanity behind some of these stories today.
Oh, the humanity.
So today's episode, I'm going to show you her case and many others like it that were used to coordinate this effort to strip Americans of their right to recover damages when a company kind of causes serious harm to you. And not just serious, I'm like talking life-altering, sometimes even fatal harm. This story has it all, Adam. At the heart of it, it is a myth to be busted, but also a conspiracy. A conspiracy by massive organizations disguised as grassroots non-profits pushing what they called the tort revolution. And today's story will hopefully highlight, especially in today's world, which is filled with endless feeds of kind of one-line headlines and clickbait, that what you read in that headline isn't actually the full story.
No, that happens all the time.
Happens all the time, but also it's always happened. And this is going to highlight just how that concept of people just reading the headlines can really impact the national collective thinking of Americans and also people around the world where those tactics are being used.
I was going to say, any country that has tabloids is going to have this, right?
And the UK is not exempt from that at all. Look at the different scandals that we've had in the UK with the News of the World and things like that. So yeah, it happens all over the place. And it's almost used as a weapon, which is just crazy to me.
Yeah, it reminds me of those headlines with Meghan Markle and the fact, I don't know what, she was eating an avocado or whatever.
Yeah, they just spin it in a way. Like the fact that they've mentioned the word avocado, like she's eating avocado, it just, even though they don't explicitly say it, it's made out to be a negative thing.
Yeah, I always remember that. She's like synonymous with avocados. And also she was touching her pregnant stomach as if that was a bad thing.
And then they would show similar headlines when Kate Middleton was doing the same thing and how she was eating healthy to kind of...
look after her child.
And it was avocado and toast.
And she was lovingly touching her belly.
Yeah.
Not like drawing
so
attention
many
to it.
racial undertones and dog whistles in there.
Terrible.
It was awful. As much as Meghan Markle is insufferable to some people, I personally love her. I love her new show, With Love for Meghan.
Yeah.
You cannot bear to watch it.
I mean, I do get drawn into it because I'm like, why are we watching 30 minutes of her arranging flowers? But you do.
She puts flowers in everything. What is that about? I don't know. Crazy. And she labeled everything like, so best mate who came over to stay, and she's like, I'm not sure if he's allergic to peanuts, so I'm just going to label these as contains nuts. I'm like, he's your best friend.
Yeah, you're supposed to have known him for like 15 years and you still don't know he knows nuts? That show was just weird.
Okay, so before we dive in, we need to build some context because this is going to be one of those episodes where it's a bit of a history lesson, a bit like the Got Milk episode where we talked about government cheese. Mm-hmm. So I need to first start by asking you, do you know what a tort is? And this is not a Meghan Markle episode.
No, I don't.
To put it simply, a tort is basically a civil wrong that is caused to someone who suffers loss or harm. It creates this legal liability for a person or organization who is responsible for causing you that harm. Whether it's something that's caused to you through a fall or a break, or maybe you lose your job or worse as a result, you're basically suing to be compensated while you recover. And if you can't ever work again, then basically this will put you in good financial standing. Mm-hmm. The term itself goes all the way back to the medieval times, but the idea of tort law as we know it today, especially in the USA, really takes shape between the 1950s and the 1970s during a time of really huge progressive reform aimed at kind of protecting individuals from corporate abuse. Like in 1966, for example, the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act was introduced, and its goal, essentially, was to set standards to reduce road deaths and injuries. So we have something very similar to that in the UK. So it makes sense that these provisions are put in place because the roads are a really dangerous place.
Yeah, they're there to protect people.
Or in 1972, for example, the USA created the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And basically, that is a federal agency designed to protect Americans from dangerous or defective products. So if you go off and you buy, let's say, a child's toy, you want to make sure that product is not going to poison your child if they put that in their mouth.
Yeah, so it goes through like testing before it goes through release.
Exactly. There are these regulations that American companies need to adhere to in order to make sure that their products don't harm anyone.
Yeah, it's like in Europe or the EU, you've got the CE that has to be on every product to make sure that it's
100%.
Standards.
That's exactly it. So it's very similar to what we have in the UK, but the big difference here is regulation. In the UK, we're very comfortable with regulators, bodies that inspect businesses and force them to clean up their act if they're putting people in harm's way, or if you're injured by like a dodgy product or a practice, a regulator might even pay you directly, and then they will then go after the organization to recover those costs. Mm-hmm. In America, not so much. And maybe it's a legacy thing of having once been under British rule, but Americans, they just do not like government overreach in any way. So instead of regulators, the USA took a different route. They make it easier for individual citizens to be able to take companies to court. The idea is simple. If companies were regularly sued and forced to pay out huge amounts of money in punitive damages, they'd be less likely to act irresponsibly in the future.
I see.
So you're hitting the company where it hurts, and that is their wallet, essentially.
That makes sense, but then I feel like surely there should be preemptive measures before it gets to that stage.
There are some. There definitely are regulators in America, but there aren't as many as you would find, let's say, in Europe, for example, where there's a regulatory body for literally everything. Mm. So let me give you a clear example. Do you remember, like, must be like 15 years ago, when Nutella got dragged for claiming that their chocolate spread was healthy in the UK.
No, did they just say that the fact it was nuts? Like, you know, it was made from real nuts and stuff like that, and that's how they made to say it's healthy?
Exactly, when the reality is it can contain 2 hazelnuts, but a shit ton of sugar and chocolate.
Yeah, it always hurts my teeth every time I have it.
So in the UK, consumer groups like Which and the Children's Food Campaign challenged Nutella's ads, and the UK Advertising Standards Authority, they launched an investigation, and in the end, Nutella agreed to change how they marketed their products, basically. You can't sell your product as a healthy kind of alternative breakfast when all it contains is like 95% sugar. But in the USA, there's no regulators riding in to help, right? So instead, a Californian housewife, she launches a class action lawsuit against Nutella's parent company, Ferrero, and they end up having to pay out $3 million in refunds, meaning that if you ever bought a jar of Nutella between a specific kind of time period, you could just go to the supermarket and then you can get your money back. That's how their system works. It's very much citizen-led.
Okay, interesting. And so anyone who felt like they were wrongly missold, that Nutella could just get their money back. How would you prove that, though?
I think if you had a receipt, most people wouldn't have the receipt. Maybe they might have a credit card charge. I don't know.
So you're telling me if I bought a jar of Nutella 6 months ago that I've used and I've still managed to keep the receipt, I could go in and claim it back?
Essentially, yeah.
Wow.
And this works in America, right? It works for them. Americans were standing up, companies were being held to account, and the whole thing was just functioning as it was intended, right? But guess who didn't like that?
Companies.
Big businesses, exactly. They didn't want consumers telling them how to behave. Their attitude was, we should be able to run our businesses however we want, even if it kills someone. So what they do is they start launching these stealthy, well-organized, very deliberate campaigns through fake organizations that pretend to be working in the public's interest. Basically, they were called these NGOs, which stands for kind of non-governmental organizations. It sounds nice, right? It sounds very wholesome, sounds very grassroots. But they were only disguising themselves as NGOs. One of them was an organization called the Center for Consumer Freedom. And it's like literally the perfect name. It's got the word consumer in it. It's got the word freedom in it. 2 words that Americans love more than anything. But these companies essentially framed themselves as champions for personal liability. They claimed that runaway lawsuits were raising prices, costing jobs, hurting wages. They said that basically consumers were losing choice and that America was becoming a nanny state where kind of the government was having too much control by making it easier for ordinary citizens to be able to sue organizations.
Right, okay.
And the public, they lap this up, right? But what most people don't realize is that these grassroots organizations were being bankrolled by companies like Coca-Cola, Big Tobacco, and even like companies like genetic engineering firms.
So, sounds a little corrupt.
It sounds horrendous. Even worse is that behind the scenes, they were being run by these massive PR firms like Burnham & Co., known for playing dirty when it comes to public messaging, right? Really aggressive PR. So when it comes to these fake NGOs, it wasn't just about complaining that Americans were too free to hold companies to account when they literally try to kill them. They were actively taking steps to try and change the law through a narrative and manipulation.
Right, okay.
And that is when we get introduced to the American Tort Reform Association. And basically, this was founded in 1970, and it had one goal. They wanted to limit how much companies could be sued for and make it harder for citizens to bring those lawsuits in the first place.
I see. So these are the people that are going to start like putting out fake stories and stuff like that. Is that right?
Exactly. So in order to get backing for this tort reform, they need the public to get behind them. So what they do is they go digging, looking for lawsuits that they can twist into the most ridiculous sounding anecdotes that they can find. They take real cases, they strip out all the facts, they remove any humanity surrounding these lawsuits, and they turn them basically into punchlines. Then at the end of every year, they'll publish a sort of a roundup of the greatest hits of so-called frivolous lawsuits, and then they'll send them out as press material.
I see.
So one example of these is a guy from Seattle who supposedly sued the dairy industry because he claimed that he'd become addicted to milk, saying that he had developed high cholesterol and the government should have put a warning label on the bottle, and if they had, then he wouldn't become addicted to milk.
I mean, how is that the government's fault?
I guess it's because the government are very heavily invested in kind of the dairy industry, right?
Yeah, I understand that. So he became so addicted. I mean, how much was he drinking? Do we know?
Who knows? That's the thing. That there's a lot of context that's not even there, right?
Yeah.
They're just anecdotes. They're just punchlines. So it sounds laughable, right?
Yeah.
But that's the point. These stories end up spreading like wildfire. And they sort of become the equivalent of memes that kind of stood to ridicule the direction that the American legal system was going.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes really popular for a time to own one of these novelty desk calendars that sort of look like a stack of Post-it notes. And each day you rip one off, and on it every day is a brand new stupid lawsuit. And one infamous lawsuit that did the rounds and was in one of these calendars was the case of Judith Haynes, who was a psychic who won $1 million because a CAT scan had made her lose her psychic abilities.
Oh my God. So she actually won.
Mm-hmm.
And how did she even prove that?
Do you think this story is true?
Well, hang on. Yeah, good point. The one of the milk sounded ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
No, it can't be. You can't prove that someone's psychic.
This is 100% true.
How did she get the money? How did she prove it?
So it sounds stupid, it sounds wild because it is deliberately distorted to sound that way.
Mm-hmm.
What actually happened was that Judith did in fact go for a CAT scan.
Yeah.
One of the things they do before you go into the CAT scan is they inject you with an iodine-based dye, which they call like a contrast material, which makes it easier to see your body in the scan. She mentions that she'd had an allergic reaction to iodine-based dyes in the past and asked if they could administer a dye that's made of something else perhaps. The doctor literally laughs in Judith's face and says there's no such thing as an allergy to these dyes. He then injects her anyway, and almost immediately Judith starts experiencing searing pains all over her body. Eventually, she collapses and she has this massive seizure right there in the hospital.
Okay, so she is actually allergic then?
Yes. In the aftermath, she is vomiting up for days, her balance is wrecked, she is suffering from these constant debilitating headaches, and from that moment on, it is impossible for her to focus on anything. She can't watch films, she can't read books, she can't even bake a cake without getting these splitting headaches.
So this has really affected her. It's almost like made her, I don't know, not immobile or anything, but just a bit, well, she's ruined her life.
She has. And yes, it is true that Judith was working as a psychic. She would do like a lot of police work assisting on criminal cases. But after that CAT scan injection, she says that she loses her psychic abilities entirely. And with it, she loses the entire way that she is able to support herself.
Although I am surprised that the police would use a psychic, but okay.
There was a time, they're probably not so much anymore, but they certainly did.
Yeah.
Eventually, as the legal system allows, and has always allowed, Judith takes the hospital to court and eventually she is awarded $986,000. But what most people do not know is those punitive damages were immediately overturned on appeal because the judge decided that the amount was grossly excessive. He orders a retrial, and at that retrial, Judith's case is thrown out altogether, so she ends up with absolutely nothing.
But then her livelihood is gone.
Exactly. So it turns out that the only reason, Adam, that she sued in the first place was because her son had died in a car accident, and she was convinced that if she still had her psychic abilities, that she would have been able to foresee this and then prevent it. So in the end, you have this deeply sad story of a woman with a disability who had lost her child, a woman whose legitimate case was thrown out, and she did not profit from this at all.
The thing is, though, if they had, explained more of that, you could say that this woman's lost a livelihood. She could then sue, and that's rightful damages.
Mm-hmm.
So
but that's not the intent of these anecdotes that exist in this digest that have been peddled by these organizations. It's not the point of it, right?
Yeah.
They have their own agenda.
Yeah.
And none of this nuance ever makes it into those headlines. Instead, her story, like so many others, is stripped down, it's spun around, it's weaponized by these big organizations as an example of why the legal system was broken. Also, that they can continue putting American lives at risk without any recourse. Isn't that just disgusting?
Yeah, it's manipulating the whole thing, isn't it?
100%. And remember, these are all backed by this PR company, Bernard & Co., who are deriving these really aggressive narratives to make you change your mind.
Well, it's working.
It gets to the point that these distorted stories become so embedded in the American culture that even Ronald Reagan himself uses Judith's story as a punchline during a speech that he's giving. And he's laughing about it. He's like, hey, did you hear about the one about the psychic who sued after losing her powers? And people literally laugh at her like she's a laughing stock. But something genuinely tragic has happened and she cannot support herself ever again.
Yeah, and I guess that's all people remember. If people aren't looking into the story and finding out that actually that didn't happen, or she did get disabilities at the end of it, but then in the instance where the judge did look at it and then threw her case out, actually she didn't profit from it anyway.
Sure, it's not one of those examples of frivolous lawsuits getting out of hand. If anything,
this is an example of the system working, stopping people from these frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah, because there's almost like a check there, isn't there? A check and a balance whereby the judge, yes, has gone all the way through the court system, but then at the last minute, the judge has gone, this is too much.
The actual outcome is correct.
Correct is a difficult one because the thing is, though, maybe she didn't need $980,000, but she did need something because she physically can't work again.
Yeah, sorry, I meant it's correct in the sense with the sensational storyline.
Yeah.
But actually, if there are cases of real people that are being affected and got medical conditions as a result, then the system isn't really working then for them.
Yeah.
So is there actually an issue? Is it broken, this system?
Exactly. Like these checks and balances show how ordinary people don't have it easy in these lawsuits. So it's not anyone could just willy-nilly go and sue someone and get a payday, right? Even in Judith Haynes' case, when you think that she has a legitimate case, the judges still had the power to overturn it. So it's ironic that the crown jewel case, the one that says, hey, look how broken America is, actually proves that the system is working exactly as it should. Isn't it just ironic?
Yeah.
And just think for a second just about how effective these NGOs are. They were basically laying the groundwork to convince the public that America needed to limit consumer rights when consumer rights weren't even under threat in the first place. It's effective enough that it results in this narrative becoming so embedded in the culture that now you even have the President of the United States referencing it. That's dangerously close to real sweeping change happening based on a complete lie. Because if they are successful and people can no longer easily compensate for the harms committed against them, that's potentially life-destroying. If you do have an accident, you cannot sue because the government have made it difficult because of these reforms. Who's going to look after you?
Yeah, what's the success rate of actual cases?
So low. It is so low anyway.
Right.
Like Judith Haynes' case being overturned is typical.
Mm-hmm.
Like very little amount of punitive damages ever get paid out. And we'll go into kind of the statistics of it later on. But it's not a problem. If anything, it's not easy enough for American citizens to get paid out punitive damages when companies cause them harm.
They just need to get rid of that PR company.
They do. 100%. It shouldn't even exist. They should be shut down. So it's crazy that with enough money and careful PR, you can essentially manufacture a reality that serves your interests, which is kind of what we're seeing right now in American politics under Trump. Like you have all these tech giants all of a sudden becoming Republican leaning as a way to further their own interests. And they're using money because they know that is the language that Donald Trump can speak, right?
Business.
So Adam, let's take a quick break. And when we get back, I'm finally going to tell you, because I know I've definitely made you work for this, all about Stella Liebeck and the infamous McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. And if you haven't guessed already, it's not all what it seems.
It wasn't hot coffee. It was tea.
It was Kool-Aid. So, Adam, we're back. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking. So, hang on, this lady.
The hot coffee lady.
Yeah. She got awarded the money.
She got awarded the money by a court, yes.
Okay. And it was the full 2.9 million.
The court awarded her the 2.9 million. Whether or not she got the 2.9 million.
Oh, okay. So, interesting. All right. So, yeah, I'm interested to know how this went down, because obviously she did have an injury by the sounds of things, but what actually happened then? Because it sounds like there's going to be way more to it, like the other case. It's not just the fact that she spilt some hot water over her.
Yes, that's right. So before the break, we laid out some very important historical context. We talked about how Americans have earned this reputation of being sue happy. And this wasn't just some natural cultural trait. It was manufactured by some of America's biggest organizations coordinating together to stigmatize ordinary Americans for suing them when their products were literally killing people. We also then talked about how this then resulted in these fake NGOs pretending to fight on the side of ordinary Americans against the so-called litigious culture. And then we talked about some of the practices that these NGOs would undertake by deliberately going around routinely hunting for lawsuits that they could easily strip of all context and all humanity, turning real human tragedies into commentary memes about how broken the American justice system was. And there's so many out there. There's so many examples of these anecdotal lawsuits. Do any come to mind for you?
Interestingly enough, Kyle, During the break, I did a bit of Googling because I was curious to know what other crazy lawsuits are there that maybe I don't know about or it doesn't make sense. But these are the ones that I quickly found. So a man sues Budweiser for failing to help him attract beautiful women.
Yeah.
The guy called Richard Overton filed a lawsuit against the company because despite consuming more and more of their beer in order to lure the attractive women in their ads, the lager failed to make his fantasies of having beautiful women fawn over him a reality. And so he sued them only for $10,000, so not too much, claiming to have suffered emotional distress, mental injury, and financial loss. It was dismissed, of course.
My point exactly. So it gets to the point where these stories, the media comes to know that they outrage the public to such a degree that they get desperate to find more of these cases. And the reality is because of these checks and balances that are in place, it gets dismissed because it gets recognized as a ridiculous lawsuit. So the judge throws it out. Sometimes even before then, they'll approach a lawyer and the lawyer will be like, this is stupid.
Why are you wasting my time?
Exactly. Or it will get through the entire process. The jury will side with them. They will then award them damages. But then the judge will go, this is fucking stupid. And he'll give them nothing. So there's all these checks and balances in place. So very few actually get through to the end. So in the media's rush to find these frivolous lawsuits, they start to just use mere threats to sue as examples of frivolous lawsuits.
Sure.
When that's all they are. They're just threats. Yeah. I can make a threat now to sue you for the most ridiculous thing, and it will be considered legitimate by these media agencies.
I see. So I could sue you for making me do this podcast on a Sunday and not allowing me to go to the cinema.
Do you want to go to the cinema?
Maybe. I'd like the option.
Any more examples of lawsuits that you've got?
Yeah, I've got a guy who sued himself. In 1995, inmate Robert Lee Brock from Indian Creek Correctional Center filed a lawsuit against himself for $5 million for violating his own civil rights. He contended that his religion forbids the use of alcohol and that even so, he made the choice to drink, which led him to commit the crimes that had sent him behind bars? It makes no sense.
But the thing is, though, the point of suing someone is to put yourself into the position that you were in before the incident happened. How is him suing himself going to put him back in the right position?
I don't know, but apparently he angrily demanded $5 million from himself, but insisted that the state should pay it on his behalf because he was a warden of the state, and therefore that's how he blamed it.
And what was the outcome?
It was dismissed.
By himself?
Yeah. Then I got a guy that sues Michael Jordan because he looked like him and was basically harassed for 15 years. It was dropped because it's ridiculous.
Exactly.
And a high school student sues for being woken up in class.
Was it dismissed?
Yeah, they suffered severe injuries in his left eardrum, I guess some kind of loud noise. It was dismissed, yes.
And the thing is, though, there's very few actual real examples. Because unless you read into that, you're not going to know.
Yeah, the headline makes it sound ridiculous.
And that it was an actual lawsuit, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's just a threat.
It's basically anyone right now just putting a Facebook post about anything online.
And of course, this also led us to Judith Haynes, who obviously had this heartbreaking story that was twisted and manipulated beyond recognition, only to be then used to further these NGOs' agenda. But now I'm going to tell you about Judith's successor, because an elderly woman is just about to buy a McDonald's coffee, a cup of coffee that is going to change her life forever, but also going to set America off on a very dangerous path. So Judith's story does eventually fade from public memory because the world's attention shifts to Stella. The story that people heard was simple. An elderly woman was driving her car, she spilled McDonald's hot coffee in her lap and decided to sue for $2.9 million out of sheer greed. And at the time, this was a non-story. It didn't even make headlines until the trial was over, when the Associated Press picked it up. And that was the very article I read too at the very beginning of the show. Do you know much about the Associated Press?
No.
So in the US, the Associated Press, or the AP for short is what they call it, is like a non-for-profit news agency. It's a bit like the BBC in terms of reputation. It's known for being really objective. It's reliable. They're known for winning tons and tons of awards like Pulitzer Prizes, etc. And because of that, AP articles are widely syndicated, which means that other publications will often use AP reporting as like the backbone of their story. And they were pretty much the only publication to report on the story at the time. Nobody else showed up to court. So with everything we know about this period in history, the rife manipulation happening, let's reread that headline just one more time. So the original article was posted in August of 1994, and the headline was, "Woman burned by hot McDonald's coffee gets $2.9 million. Hearing that headline now, rather than being outraged initially as you were, What do you think now?
I just think like it's just a load of baloney, or there's more information that's been left out.
It could be both. It doesn't have to be all. It could be like a load of baloney and a lot of context has been left out, I would say.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And the thing is, though, that article I read to you in the beginning, that's not even the full article, and that's very important. That was only the very first few lines that I read to you. The AP have this tendency to write in what they call the inverted pyramid style.
So inverted pyramid makes you think start big at the top and then go smaller to the bottom.
100%. Meaning, of course, the most important facts go at the very top,
Yeah.
supporting details follow, and then the background kind of details come later on. And this way of writing means that there's no real narrative to the story. There is very often little emotional context. It's just kind of bullet point facts almost.
Sure.
Which feels weird to us today because we're used to kind of stories telling an actual narrative. But back then, this is super typical, especially for outlets committed to just the facts reporting. The upside of this style is that editors can repurpose these stories from the AP and use them as the backbone of their own stories. And in order to do that, they just need to how many lines? I've got like 30 lines that I need to fill. I know that if I just cut all the lines from the bottom, that's the least important information as it goes.
Right.
And I'm just left with the solid facts at the top. It makes editing super easy, allowing you to create a short version without losing any of the main points. The downside to this is that it can create gaps where context just falls away. And this is very common. When every other publication picks up the AP story, they shorten it, they strip it down even further so it can fit into 20 lines. Editing is easy because they can just cut from the bottom. And they can do this with a very little thought because the AP coverage is extremely trusted, right? That's what their reputation is built on. So they don't need to go and fact check and double check and triple check, etc. They can just go, cut 20 lines, there's my story.
Okay, so what was the original article about this woman then? Because I'm just thinking they've obviously taken that, okay, she got burnt, she sued, $2.9 million. But what else was in that article?
Yeah. So in the original article, which we'll get to in a little more detail later on, basically, that's where they put all the information around the negligence that McDonald's was exhibiting and the dangers that they were putting the public at and the calculated kind of tactics that they were employing to maximize profits, but also the extent of her injuries.
Because it makes me feel like, did she crash or anything like that? And therefore, that's why she needs that money for medical treatment.
100%. She does need that money for her medical expenses. But you said crash, right?
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't even driving.
What?
Mm-hmm. But again, that doesn't matter because when the story is repurposed, all that background info, the stuff that justifies this lawsuit in a human way is just cut. And it creates this perfect storm because from there, local TV channels, they pick up the news, which is very often the clip stories of the original article. Late night TV shows, they pick it up, they start making jokes about it, and the whole thing just explodes across America. It becomes this ultimate proof of look how crazy Americans have gotten. Even today, when you ask most people what they remember of this, they will literally say, yeah, it was about some Karen who spilled coffee while driving and then had the audacity to sue McDonald's and make millions in a payday. But none of that was true. So here's what actually happened.
Okay.
On the morning of Thursday, February the 27th, 1992, Cristiano and his 79-year-old grandmother, Stella Liebeck, were driving home after dropping off Chris's uncle at the airport. Stella had just moved to Albuquerque from Tucson, and she was planning on buying a home there so that she could be closer to her family after her husband had tragically died. And even at 79, Stella was incredibly active. She was really articulate, she was sharp. Literally just a week earlier, she was digging up a huge tree in her back garden.
She's 79.
She was 79. So she is also strong as well.
Yeah.
On the way home, they decide to stop at McDonald's for breakfast. Chris goes to the drive-thru. He pays for their meals. He hands Stella a 49-cent cup of coffee served in like a white styrofoam cup.
49 cents.
I know.
Remember that world?
And by the way, remember, she gets $2.9 million, which is the equivalent of 2 days worth of coffee sales. 49 cents per cup.
Bloody hell.
That goes to show you how much coffee they're selling across the country. Stella then asks Chris to pull over in the parking lot so she can add cream and sugar to her coffee, because that's how she liked it. Now, something very important here. In 1992, cup holders in cars, they're just not a thing, Adam.
But where do you put your cup?
Exactly. You just don't. You don't have anywhere to put them, especially in Chris's 1989 Ford Probe. Brand new cars in the early 90s were starting to have them, but most cars weren't brand new.
Then they were like toying with death just there.
100%.
Drinking in a car without a cup holder.
Yeah. Crazy. But also, she's not drinking while she's driving. They are pulled over and Stella is a passenger. She places a cup of coffee between her thighs to kind of steady it while she's opening up the lid. As she lifts the lid on the far side, the entire cup tips over and dumps scalding hot coffee directly into her lap. Stella is wearing sweatpants.
Right.
Meaning that the fabric instantly soaks up the coffee and is holding it against her skin. She obviously screams out in pain. She's burning. As fast as she can, bear in mind, she's 79 years old. She gets out of the car. She rips off her wet clothes. Chris scrambles to the boot. He grabs a bed sheet and wraps it around her to obviously protect grandma's kind of modesty. And then he helps her into the back seat. Stella's body is already going to shock at this point. Her temperature is plummeting. She starts to shake violently. She's becoming really nauseous.
Oh my God.
To the point that she is close to passing out from the pain.
Wow, that's a lot. Like, I mean, everyone's kind of burnt themselves, but I guess this is a lot of hot liquid.
Yeah, in a lot of sensitive areas. Your inner thighs, Adam.
Yeah.
Chris naturally races her to the nearest hospital, but it's been overwhelmed by patients from a pile-up on the highway earlier in that day. So they have to get back into the car and drive across town to another hospital. By the time that Stella is seen, 45 minutes has passed since she was first burned. Doctors said that because of her age, the level of shock that she was in, and the severity of her burns, they genuinely thought that she was going to die.
What a way to go. That was the case.
In excruciating pain. Stella sustained second-degree and third-degree burns over 20% of her body, including her thighs, her buttocks, and her groin. Adam, her burns were so bad that her labia had fused together.
Oh my, that hot.
That is somebody's grandmother. Isn't that awful?
That is terrible.
It was so bad that they had to bring in skin specialists to remove the skin from her thighs and graft new skin over her burns, which was incredibly painful for her. In the end, Stella is left with permanent, horrific scarring, permanent disability. She has to spend 8 days in hospital, but eventually she insists on discharging herself because she just cannot afford the bills.
Bloody hell.
What a system. Her insurance company did agree to pay 80% of the costs, but even then she didn't have enough money for the 20%. I didn't say this before, but she had $10,000 saved up from the sale of her old house, which she was going to use as a down payment on a new one in Albuquerque so she could be closer to her family. But even that was gone. It was all swallowed up by the medical bills, and it still was not enough to cover them. So she had to discharge herself. She had no choice. Isn't that heartbreaking? That's your grandma.
Yeah, I'm just shocked about how much damage this has done.
Exactly. All of that detail is left out of the retelling of this situation.
Yeah, because it just makes it sound like, she's, before you said that was in her lap, that she's just sipped it and burnt her mouth kind of thing. And you think everyone's done that. Essentially,
because of the medical bills, she's left homeless. That $10,000 that she was hoping to use as a down payment has to now go on medical bills. And she's stuck with her daughter.
Which, the daughter's get your own house.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the relationship was like.
No, but even still, that's not the plan. The whole idea has just been ruined, and she hasn't really still got the money.
And remember, this is a woman who is 79 years old, extremely independent, extremely active, really alert. She now doesn't have anything. How awful for you to lose that independence at that age. At this point, Stella's daughter, Judy, decides that she is going to reach out to McDonald's, not to sue them, but to ask them if they could review their coffee procedures and if they're willing to help with Stella's medical costs. Her justification, Adam, is that she has insurance on her own home. If someone breaks her arm or hurts themselves while they're visiting, she would be expected to help out with any damages, right?
Yeah.
In the letter, she requests that McDonald's send them their insurance details so they can seek assistance with $20,000 that Stella is now owed on her medical bills and to help her get back on her feet. All reasonable stuff, right? There's nothing unreasonable about that.
That's a very conservative amount, really, and actually probably just all that she needs in order to get by and move on, sort of
and
thing.
To put yourself back in the position that you were in before this happened.
Yeah.
Minus, obviously, the physical disability that she now has and the pain.
Yeah.
McDonald's writes back to her and say that the best they can do is offer her $800, which they felt was more than generous considering that she was the one responsible for spilling the coffee into her own lap. Now, Stella's not disputing that. She 100% agrees. Her argument was that McDonald's, either company-wide or at that location, was serving coffee at a dangerously hot temperature. Judy writes back they ignore her completely. She tries one more time, just radio silence. Basically, McDonald's was standing by their belief that Stella was solely responsible for spilling the coffee on herself. But get this, they also argued that she was responsible because she did not remove her sweatpants fast enough.
I don't think that's any of their business.
Exactly. Yes, it's a good way of putting it. None of your business. They said basically if she'd removed them faster, the burns wouldn't have been that bad. They also said that the only reason her injuries were so severe was because of her old skin. Basically, If she had been younger, they claimed her injuries would not have been so bad. Like, F old people, right? And their old skin.
Yeah,
like,
if you were young and hot, you would have been fine.
Yeah, what a bunch of bumholes.
I feel like this family's been very reasonable. Could have been a whole lot worse, whatever. And they're just being shafted.
So they tell her that if she was not happy with the $800 that they offered her, then they are free to take them to court. And that's because McDonald's knew, particularly in New Mexico, that there'd never been a precedent where a jury had ruled in favor of a plaintiff in a product liability case. So they felt that they were confident that they were going to win.
Yeah, but like they underestimated an old lady with a burnt crotch.
That's somebody's grandma.
Yeah. What's the phrase? Hell have no fury like a woman scorned.
Or scolded.
Or scolded, yeah.
I feel awful for her. And the thing is, though, as you can see, I can feel myself getting angrier and angrier as we unravel the story a bit more. From just a summary in one sentence.
Yeah, you just think like of anyone's mum or grandma that is elderly, they're just not out to probably, I don't know, get a quick rich
She's
scheme.
lived her life. She's had her kids. She's been married. She's had a house. What is she looking to gain?
She just want to enjoy the rest of her retirement.
She said that she's never sued anyone in her life. This was not a lottery ticket for her. This was essentially her last resort. Like, she cannot live with her daughter for the rest of her life. It's not fair on Stella, and it's not fair on our daughter. So Stella finds a lawyer, someone who had actually handled a similar case 6 years earlier when a woman had also suffered a third-degree burn from McDonald's coffee. And
did that person win?
Well, the case never actually went to trial. They did settle out of court for $27,000. But honestly, that is more than what Stella was hoping for. So she didn't want a fortune, but also she didn't want to be a burden. And that was enough for her to not be a burden. Her lawyer files a lawsuit against McDonald's for gross negligence for selling a product that was manufactured in a way that was unreasonably dangerous. Eventually, on August the 8th, 1994, the case goes to trial. Both sides bring experts in to testify how hot liquid needs to be to cause a third or second degree burn. One expert claims that 160 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 70 degrees Celsius, it takes just 20 seconds of contact to cause a third degree burn. That doesn't seem that hot to me, does it?
The thing is that if you do accidentally get boiling water over you, it tends to be like a little bit, like a splash and for a second, but you've got that on your skin for 20 seconds? Yeah, that's going to hurt.
Yeah, it's a good point, because normally it is just a splash, right? At 180 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 82 degrees Celsius, it takes just 12 to 15 seconds to cause a third degree burn. At 190 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 90 degrees Celsius, it takes less than 3 seconds to cause a third degree burn. It's then revealed that McDonald's corporate policy was to serve its coffee between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 20 to 30 degrees hotter than any of their competitors.
That's why I boil the kettle at 85 degrees, so that by the time you drink it, it's below 80 degrees.
Yeah, but I take so much longer before I want to drink it, like hours.
That's not my problem.
So get this. Initially, McDonald's said that the reason why they serve their coffee at that temperature between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit is to ensure maximum extraction of flavor. Now, I get that, that's fine. But it does not need to stay at that temperature when it's handed over to the customer, right? They can make a batch, they can maintain it at a safer temperature, or even drop a drop of cold water into it.
Yeah.
Bring down their temperature. Then Stella's lawyer shows the jury photos of Stella's injuries. And Adam, I promise you, they are horrific. I'm not going to describe them. They are awful. If you want to look them up, go ahead and look them up. You will not like it. It genuinely looks like she has been savagely attacked by a bear.
Oh, my word.
So much so that one of the juries, Jack Elliott, he goes home that night and he tells his daughters that you are never to drink coffee while driving in a car ever again. He's like, that is it. That's how severe these injuries are.
Yeah, for McDonald's not to take that seriously and just any kind of sympathy on this, because this isn't just someone that's got a little burn then. This is horrendous.
Maintain that thought there, because you've landed on the money there. Think about the sympathy that you think that McDonald's should have for this woman. Next, they bring in McDonald's quality assurance manager to the stand. They ask him, why has McDonald's never consulted an expert about the safe serving temperature of their coffee? He literally laughs and he goes, why would we need to do that? You ready for this? The lawyer pulls out a stack of documents and says, because of these 700 other incidents where customers have brought complaints or attempted to sue you because they were burned by your company's coffee.
That's 700. This isn't like just now a couple of incidents. That is a lot for you to actually review your policies and processes and put something in place.
$500,000 was paid out across all of those settlements. And yet, never did McDonald's go, maybe our coffee is too hot.
Yeah.
What do you think the manager's response was?
I'm guessing I'm not going to like it.
He says 700 might seem a lot, but out of all the billions of cups of coffee we sell every year, those are really insignificant numbers. And get this, Adam. He says, I'm really extremely happy with those odds.
What a dick. Yes, it is a very small number in the grand scheme of things, but that is still too high for people to get burnt. And surely just dropping it down 5 degrees would probably reduce that way lower. And then you wouldn't be paying out any $500,000.
It gets worse. It's then revealed that McDonald's had actually calculated how much money they would lose if they lowered their coffee temperature. Lower temperatures means customers would drink the coffee faster and therefore ask for a free refill, which is apparently a thing back then. They said that preventing these refills with hotter coffee would save more money by a factor of 100, and so it was far more profitable to simply settle those 700 cases. In short, protecting and maximizing profits was more important than protecting people.
Yeah, but these people have got some serious injuries.
When asked if they would ever consider changing their policy, McDonald's said, there are more serious dangers in a McDonald's restaurant than the temperature of our coffee.
They're not budging on this, are they?
They're not. That's the important bit, because throughout this trial, McDonald's was so arrogant, almost sociopathic, they genuinely did not think that they had done anything wrong. Meanwhile, the jury, completely outraged, because behind every single one of those statistics that McDonald's shrugged at was a real life person. That's someone's child, that's someone's grandmother, it's someone's mother. So finally, the jury, they deliver their verdict. They assign 20% of the blame to Stella. Fair enough. She spilled the damn coffee.
Yeah.
But they assign the remaining 80% of blame to McDonald's. They then award Stella $160,000 in compensatory damages, and because McDonald's conduct was found to be willful, reckless, and malicious, they award $2.7 million in punitive damages to Stella, because that's how much revenue McDonald's made for 2 days' worth of coffee sales. So $2.7 million seems like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, Adam, it's just a drop in the ocean for them. It's 2 days.
Why 2 days? Any reason they settle on that?
It's just what the jury came up with.
Okay.
And it's a big bloody number. It's too big for someone like Stella.
You alluded that maybe she didn't get all of that. Is this why it then puts a damper on her case?
To a degree, I think it's a gross number that when it's reported, if they said she gets like $160,000, then it'd just probably be another headline that faded away into obscurity, but it's that big number.
It's barely even a headline. People go, oh, yeah, well, something bad won't happen or whatever.
Yeah. But even in this case, just like with Judith Hames, the system steps in to check itself. Because after the trial, the judge reduces the punitive damages from $2.7 million to $480,000. He applies what they call triple damages. Basically, it's 3 times the amount of compensatory damages that she needs. In a nutshell, it equates to Stella's total medical expenses multiplied by 3.
Okay.
It's a safeguard, right? It's there to make sure people do not use the courts for windfall payments. That is baked into the system. It's part of how the American system works. Therefore, even further proving that it's a myth that these frivolous lawsuits are causing America to be bled dry, right? Because they have these different checks in place. Yet another check. And even then, McDonald's, they continue to appeal. They keep fighting. And in the end, Stella settles for an undisclosed amount, which they know is far less than $480,000. But we never find out what that is, because the condition of them ending the case was that she signed an NDA that prevented her from ever speaking publicly about this case ever again, even to defend herself when this blows up.
Interesting. So she just has to stay quiet, and people go like, how dare you get 2.9 million or whatever? She's like, well, I didn't.
But it's
she
a
can't
lie.
even say that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like she probably got more than 27,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah. She got probably a decent amount and definitely, hopefully covered all of her expenses. I think it's not about how much she got. It's about how much McDonald's should have been on the hook for. Because while $30,000 would have been more than enough money for someone like Stella, that wouldn't have been enough to change McDonald's practices.
Yeah.
They should have been sued for 100 million, 200 million, whatever it would be. An amount that would make them change their practices, because the whole point of the American government making it easier for ordinary citizens to sue businesses is the idea that the more people that sue them, the more incentive there will be for these businesses to change their practices. And 2.7 million is not even enough to get them to still want to change their temperature water. What would it have been if it was 2 years worth of sales? They probably would have changed their temperature, right?
Yeah, and they probably would have got rid of their free refills or whatever. You know what I mean? They would have changed something about how they process coffee.
Exactly. So they're fighting over pennies with ordinary citizens that they have done harm to. It is disgusting.
Do you think they do that? I mean, I understand that they've got to ensure that not everyone goes after them and they've got to stand strong. And I get that from a business perspective. You've got to protect your reputation, this, that, and the money and everything. But did they put any changes in after this?
There will be some changes that will gradually come out as time goes on. But right now, there's no changes. They still are adamant that Stella is the bad guy here. And that is how the Associated Press finally report on this case. They were the only press association there. And following this article, this is how the whole country comes to find out about Stella Liebeck. And because America was already primed to be outraged by these types of stories, naturally the story just explodes from there. Newspapers, they clip the story down to fit their available space, cutting the details about Stella's injuries, about McDonald's corporate callousness, putting money ahead of people, and they focus only on the crazy old woman who sues McDonald's and gets millions of dollars narrative. It's eventually picked up by late night shows who mock her for literally months. It evolves from a headline joke to just a general reference. Like, you'd just be out with your mates or something. You'd be like, oh, I'm so skint this month, you know. Maybe I'll go to Starbucks and like spill some coffee and get a windfall. You know what I mean? It becomes a reference. And TV storylines center on parodies of this story. Like in Seinfeld, for example, they do an entire episode where Kramer burns himself on hot coffee that he tries to smuggle into the cinema in his trousers.
Well, that's a mistake.
Exactly. He obviously falls over and then he tries to sue. And they make an entire show about it. It even features in an American country music song by Toby Keith where the lyrics are, plasma's getting bigger, Jesus getting smaller, spill a cup of coffee, make $1 million.
Interesting. Stella never thought she'd make a reference into a song.
Hey, do you know what? Things can change for you no matter what age you are.
That's very true.
And even today, when you ask people about it, they'll say she spilled coffee while driving and then got millions of dollars. And there is this amazing video on YouTube where people are interviewed in the streets like 20 years later. And they're asked, like, what do they remember of the story? And they're like all the usual stuff, like she wanted a payday and she sued because the coffee was too hot, like, well, duh. And like she made a mockery of the justice system. And then they show them photos of her injuries. And you can literally watch their face change. Adam, they're horrified. They just cannot believe the extent of her injuries.
Yeah, if it's not public knowledge, then, and they've been told or influenced by the media, then yeah, what else to think?
But by this point, 20 years later, it was too late. The story become kind of another weapon, another tool used by these fake NGOs to push this tort reform narrative. News stations, radio shows, TV shows, they all run with it. They run with bite-sized versions of it. They strip back the facts, all designed just to create this outrage. And through it all, not one single journalist ever bothered to reach out to Stella for comment. All it would have taken is just one phone call or knocking on her door. If they did, the world would have heard the truth, right? They would have seen her struggling to stand up.
She wasn't allowed to say anything, wasn't she?
Doesn't matter. Like, they can go and speak to her family. It's her family that later come forward. They didn't sign no NDA.
Yeah, okay.
But no one reached out. If someone called me up and I was Stella, I'd be like, let me put you onto the phone to my daughter. Because she didn't sign the NDA.
She'll tell you everything.
Yeah.
I guess these news reporters, whatever, they're just copying other articles, like you say. So no one's bothering to fact check or anything like that.
No. And it's a perfect storm because it all originated from that one story, the AP, which is renowned for its non-biased and objective reporting. Yeah. They haven't done anything wrong. I'm not blaming them for it, but it's a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, this story creates this insatiable appetite for more crazy lawsuit stories. And so the media scramble to find any example they can find. But there aren't many going around because actual ridiculous lawsuits either don't come of anything or they're thrown out of court. So the press start to dress up mere threats to sue as examples of these crazy lawsuits, which is mad because, like I said earlier on, anyone can make a threat. They run with a story of a couple having dinner one night on their honeymoon when they're sat near the smoking area. They finish their dinner, everything is lovely, but then a few weeks later, they sue the restaurant for $1 million, saying that the drifting smoke had upset their expected right to conjugal happiness.
The smoke.
The smoke did.
That must have been dismissed, right?
Yeah, that's it. It's just a threat. It didn't come of anything.
I'm going to threaten every company.
Exactly. And then you go to the media and then people go, oh, this is another crazy lawsuit that's going to outrage America, but it didn't come of anything.
Yeah.
got thrown out. Another one tells of a convicted sex offender running away from police in Maine who decides to hide out in the woods for a few days. This is Maine in North America. And basically, he loses a couple toes to frostbite. And so he decides to sue police for not catching him sooner.
That's so stupid.
The important thing to understand here is that these cases almost never actually make it to court because, of course, they're ridiculous. No serious lawyer wants to touch them. And so, in the desperation to find crazy lawsuits, the media starts reporting on mere threats to sue. And even this fact alone shows you, Adam, that the system is designed to weed out these chances. First, no lawyer wants to touch it, so check one, right? If they do, then a judge throws it out for being idiotic, check two. And even then, if it does somehow make it to trial, the judge can limit the punitive damages to triple damages, just to make sure that people don't profit more than they're actually genuinely going to need. Check three. So the system has this way of balancing itself out. The idea that people are successfully suing over the silliest things in America is just a myth. It doesn't exist. Obviously, some cases are legitimate, like Stella's and Judith Hames, but in their reporting, the media strip away all the humanity, all the important justifiable details, and what you're left with is just a batshit sounding story.
Yeah.
Another good example of another genuine case that gets twisted to sound dumb is that of a guy with a ladder. The version you hear is typically this idiot sets up a ladder over frozen manure, he slips, and then he falls, and then he sues for millions and millions of dollars. But when you actually look at the details, you find out there's no manure. The guy was actually climbing up a ladder that was certified to hold 1,000 pounds. It was even labeled as such. So his argument was that if the label says it can hold 1,000 pounds and I'm like 180 pounds, then I expect it to hold at least 180 pounds. And because it didn't, he's now disabled. And so this is a very black and white product liability case at hand.
So where did the manure come from? And the frozen manure?
It just gets distorted and twisted to make it sound ridiculous.
Right, okay.
So now you've got like this headline is like, haha, look at this guy suing because he slips on cow poo. There just was no cow poo. So the point is, in the middle of all of this media frenzy that's happening, this moral panic, the Republican Party starts seeing this as an opportunity to start using this anger to win public support during their 1994 midterms, promising that they're going to crack down on these ridiculous lawsuits. They come up with what they call the Contract with America for Americans. And if it's passed, it'll do two major things. It's going to place a cap on punitive damages in product liability cases. And also, it would introduce the loser pays clause, meaning if you sue a company and you lose, you have to pay all of their legal costs.
That's going to discourage people from doing anything, I guess, stupid.
It's going to discourage them from doing anything.
Yeah, even more so because people feel like, well, I lost a leg, but I'm worried that I'm not going to get anything.
Exactly. Even if it's genuine case where you can't work, you're going to say to yourself, well, that's bloody McDonald's. They've got the best lawyers in the world. If I lose, I've got to pay all of their lawyer fees.
Yeah.
When you think about who this hurts the most, it's not these giant corporations. It's poor people. It's ordinary people who would never be able to absorb those kind of costs. Basically, if this bill is passed, the next Stella Liebeck will never have her day in court ever again.
And I guess it's like imminent, is it? Or the next year they're expecting it to happen?
This is the midterms, so the Republicans are trying to win support. This is a real hot topic across America, and it's causing all this outrage. They're like, this is low-hanging fruit. If we say that we're going to tackle this and make this harder for people to be able to sue, we'll get loads of backing. People will vote for the Republicans, and then we can get in power.
But it's like fake news. It's almost like Brexit in the sense that you were told something, people get angry about it, but actually it hasn't been thought through. People don't really know what's going to happen. And I feel sorry for the people that don't really understand the situation.
Exactly. They don't understand the consequences of what this means.
Because in 3 or 4 years' time, if it does get passed and they end up needing something, they're going to go, oh, that's what that system was put in place for?
Eventually, when the midterms do come around, the Republicans do very, very well. And it's largely because of promises like this based on fabrications and distortions.
Yeah.
They gain control of both the House and the Senate, and now they've got the numbers to get this bill reform in front of the President of the United States. Here's the nutso thing. The bill also needs kind of credibility, right? So they have to back up this bill with statistics. They look to a book that was written in the 1990s that was written to capitalize on the outrage that was already sweeping America around kind of frivolous lawsuits and was called the litigation explosion. And basically, the book, as all these other kind of anecdotal digests had, it just contained 272 short anecdotes about crazy lawsuits, obviously devoid of any context, mostly twisted facts, just like Stella's and Judith's. And then in the book, it contained just 6 actual statistics. And guess what?
They weren't real?
They were all misleading statistics. Basically, claimed that Americans pay $130 billion in punitive damages every year. But what it doesn't say is that that number also includes payouts, meaning that if someone steals your car and your insurance pays you out, that also counts towards that $130 billion. So it's not just punitive damages of cases that you've brought against a company. So it's really misleading. Another one states that Americans file 18 million lawsuits every year, which is technically true. But again, what it doesn't say is that this also includes stuff like custody claims, minor contractual disputes between you and your landlord, etc. And when you look closer, what you actually find is that only 7% of those 18 million cases are actually torts, cases where someone is harmed and then decides to sue. So it's really misleading stuff, right? They also make a huge deal about the amount of punitive damages that are being paid out across those 7% of the 18 million cases. But again, when you really look at it, only 3% of tort cases actually results in a punitive damage being paid out. So it's barely anything. And get this, in 1996, the average payout was only $38,000.
So it's not a lot really at all.
There's nothing there. When you dig into the statistics that are backing up this massive piece of legislation, none of it proves that lawsuits are out of control. It just proves that just regular activity is happening as part of the legal framework that Americans have already set up for themselves. And also remember, filing lawsuits in America is very heavily involved, which many Americans just don't have time for. And when you compare it to like other developed countries like the UK, Americans actually bring far fewer liability cases forward because of that very fact. Like if you want to file a lawsuit, you're the one who has to go ahead and do all the paperwork. You've got to deal with all the stress that comes with that. You've got to pay all the legal finances up front and then hopefully recover that from the other side. So far fewer Americans actually bring these lawsuits in the first place, unlike other countries where we just send off an email to a regulatory body and go,
you deal with it.
You deal with it. And they will. Luckily, some people do have sense in this little history lesson, because when it gets to Bill Clinton's desk with those 6 statistics, he sees right through all of it and he ultimately just vetoes the entire bill. Basically, he says, "Today I'm returning to Congress without my signature the product liability legislation sent to me this week. I take this step because I believe this bill tilts against American values and would deprive them of the ability to recover fully when they are injured by a defective product." And it goes on and on and on and on. And it talks about how it goes against our values. And actually, we want to protect our grandparents. We want to protect our kids. We want to know that if we get into a car and it crashes, it's not going to explode on impact.
Yeah, and it's not our fault.
Exactly. So he just completely vetoes the entire bill.
That's good.
It is. But the thing is, though, that's only for a second. Because those fake NGOs, they are just furious. So what they do is they start pouring in even more money into lobbying campaigns, pushing their agenda across every single state in the United States.
So corrupt.
And it's almost like a fact sheet, right? They send like the script off to all these different news agencies and radio stations around the world. So someone will like grab these different clippets of these pictures essentially, and they'll overlay them and it's the exact same script. And this is all still going on today. It's a crazy situation when you think about it. You've got these big corporations fighting the little guys instead of just stopping for a second and saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we should just stop being dicks. Maybe we should stop hurting our customers. Maybe, just maybe, we should think about how to avoid doing harm in the future. But instead, they just want to save a few million.
It means missing out on some money. Yeah, they're not going to do that.
It's so sick. So following all of this, Stella's life is just marked with severe physical suffering. She loses all of her independence, and there was a significant decline in her quality of life that led straight up to her death in 2004. Many people only know Stella's story outside of the full context of what we've covered today, which is just so sad because she was bound by this NDA. They don't know everything that was going on around it. And yes, a lot of people have told the story and debunked this as a myth. So it's really cool to take a really well-known story and kind of plaster it against the context of what's been happening in the world at this time. Because outside this lawsuit, there was a bigger agenda at play about how a real human suffering was being used and twisted to serve a bigger corporate agenda. And if you want to know a bit more, because of course this is the Compendium, we only focus on the snapshot of a bigger story, you can check out this brilliant documentary, which I think is still available on YouTube. That's how I watched it. It's called Hot Coffee and was released in 2011, directed by Susan Saladoff, who's like a former medical malpractice attorney. Basically, the documentary goes into deep about what happened to Stella, but also the broader implications of tort reform and consumer rights in the United States. So it paints a real rich kind of historical picture of where they came from and where it's going now. And honestly, it's just brilliant. I definitely recommend you guys checking that out. But Adam, that is the real story of Stella Liebeck and how she was used as a pawn to push this narrative that Americans had become obsessed with suing each other.
Yeah, and still, but I guess, and not even learned from that, but it's a shame. It sounds like she still lived for quite a while afterwards then. If it was 1992, did you say it's
1994 is when the trial ended, so she lived another 10 years. So she lived to
early 90s maybe?
Yeah, early 90s, which is a good innings.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's sad that those last 10 years of her life could have been better for her.
Yeah, she could have been more active. I don't know how that impacted her own mobility and things like that. And yeah, it feels like this story should have come out a lot sooner around the time in terms of her injuries. But, McDonald's wanted to squash that.
Yeah. And I guess with channels like the internet and Reddit and Facebook and stuff like that, it is getting out there, but it's such an old story.
But I wonder how many other incidents like this that have been happening that people just don't know about, where there is someone actually been seriously hurt.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Adam, do you want to run the outro for this week?
Yes, let's do it.
And so that brings us to the end of another fascinating foray into the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating things. We hope you enjoyed the ride as much as we did.
And if today's episode sparks your curiosity, do us a favor and follow us on your favorite podcast app. It truly makes a world of difference and helps more people discover the show.
For our dedicated freaks out there, don't forget that next week's episode is already waiting for you on our Patreon and is completely free to access.
And if you want even more, then join our Certified Freaks tier to unlock the entire archive, delve into exclusive content, and get a sneak peek at what's coming next. We'd love for you to be part of our growing community.
We drop new episodes every Tuesday. Until then, remember, sometimes the hottest burns come from the coldest corporate responses.
Ooh.
See you next time.
See ya.